Hello everyone, GK here, and it's that time again, as belated as it is, for another Iceberg video. This time the subject is the Nintendo 64 console in general. For the few of you who don't know what an iceberg is at this point, let me sum it up. Essentially, they are aggregated facts for a particular subject. Upper levels are of common knowledge that most people know, and the lower levels get more obscure until they start to include theories, speculations, and outright creepypastas. As you can see, this one is quite dense, so we are going to hit the ground running with the first level. Nintendo 64. The console that this iceberg is the subject of. Released on June 23rd, 1996 in Japan, September 29th of 96 in North America, and March 1st of 97 in Europe and Oceania. It sold about 32.9 million units worldwide. There's quite a lot to say about it, but I'm sure most of you know the basics and general history, and as we go down this iceberg, we will get to learn a little bit more about it. Super Mario 64. A launch title and probably one of the more well-known games for the console, it was also the subject of the first iceberg image which kicked off this whole trend. Super Smash Bros. Another extremely well-known game, and the first in the Smash Bros. Series. It started out as a generic fighting game before Nintendo characters were introduced. More on that later. Ocarina of Time. Of course, another game that needs no introduction. Arguably the best game on the console. Now, the Nintendo 64 is generally considered to have aged rather poorly, especially compared to the Super Nintendo. Despite that, Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask probably aged the best out of the N64 catalog. Really, anything bad about them is mostly the limitations of the technology, like the graphics. HAL Laboratory, a second-party developer for Nintendo, most well known for the Kirby series, Earthbound, and Smash Bros. Fun fact, the name HAL was decided so that it would be one step ahead of IBM, in that each letter of HAL, H-A-L, is one letter ahead of IBM. DK64 Rap. This is the rap theme song made for Rare's Donkey Kong 64. It was the subject to mild censorship as the lyric "One hell of a guy" would later be changed to "One heck of a guy," most notably in the Super Smash Bros. Melee rendition of the song. BLJ memes, or the backwards long jump, is a Mario 64 glitch primarily used in speedrunning that will allow Mario to have massive amounts of backwards momentum to phase through various obstacles. It has been the subject of memes, primarily of Mario breaking the fabric of reality.
So long, Bowser!
This is what many people hear when Mario throws Bowser during his boss fight. Of course, that is not what is actually said, but it has been the subject of debate what exactly he is saying. It was generally believed the real phrase was, "So long, King Bowser," which was close, but Charles Martinet has confirmed it's "So long, Kinga Bowser." Luigi model leaked in Mario 64 source code. During the infamous Nintendo Giga Leak, we were given a lot of beta assets of various games, but most notably a Mario 64 Luigi model. It has been known for a long time that Luigi was considered for Mario 64, but we have never seen any promotional materials about it or assets, as they were scrubbed from the final release. ROM hacks. As with most retro consoles, community-made ROM hacks are a thing on the Nintendo 64. The ones I'm personally the most familiar with are Mario 64 hacks, particularly Star Road and Last Impact. Also, custom modded maps for Mario Parties 1, 2, and 3. If you want to see any of these played, check out my Twitch channel as we do play different maps from time to time, on top of Mario Party being a frequent game I stream. And while you're at it, I would also appreciate a like if you enjoyed this video and a sub to my channel. Doing so would let me know that there's interest in me creating more content. There are many content creators that use games from the N64 as a focal point in the content they produce. I'm sure many of you have heard of at least some of these guys if you're watching this video. The Iceberg features Nathaniel Bandy, Hobo Bros, SMG4, Tetrabit Gaming, Simple Flips, and Luigi Kid Gaming. Mario 64 TAS speedruns. For those who don't know, a TAS, or tool-assisted speedrun, is generating a playthrough of a game using various tools to make frame-perfect inputs that would otherwise be very difficult to pull off throughout an entire run of a game, or sometimes even outright impossible for a human being to pull off. For most games, they are usually used to showcase theoretical perfect speedruns of a game. But with some, and in particular Mario 64, they are used to showcase outrageous and ridiculous tricks that the average person would probably not even understand what was going on. Rareware. Another well-known second-party developer that initially worked almost exclusively with Nintendo, much like HAL. However, they would eventually be purchased by Microsoft in 2002. They were well known for developing Donkey Kong Country, GoldenEye, Banjo-Kazooie, Perfect Dark, and Conker's Bad Fur Day, a game that was made to be a parody of the cutesy character archetype and a raunchy comedy. This direction was actually decided during development, as the game was originally another cutesy platformer. Conker's first game was Conker's Pocket Tales, which came out 2 years prior to Bad Fur Day. You can see that the game was made as a normal kids game. During development of the first N64 Conker game, they received criticism for the game appearing generic. When debating how to differentiate the game from the others, an artist recommended making the game into what it is known as today. Bowser's Dank Rave, a ROM hack for Mario 64, one that's on the stranger end of the spectrum. I don't have much else to say, I haven't played it, but I will link to its download page and a video of it. Super Mario 64 Beta Archive, a YouTube channel that supposedly showcased beta assets from Mario 64. It is presented in a very convincing archival way, but the content on this channel is not real. It was inspired by the Iceberg trend and the fake anti-piracy measures in games like Mario Party DS. Virtual Console. This is Nintendo's eShop, primarily used to sell older games on newer consoles. The N64 was not that well represented in the Virtual Console, only receiving about 20 releases on both the Wii and the Wii U shops. Compared to the NES or SNES, which featured well over 100 releases each. The N64 may finally have its time in the spotlight with the recent announcement of the overpriced N64 expansion for the Switch. Hey You Pikachu. This was a very gimmicky virtual pet kind of game, although I'm sure at the time this seemed very advanced, using voice recognition to communicate to the game with a whopping 256 words in the game's database. I honestly don't know how well the voice recognition actually worked, although I'd be willing to believe it wasn't the best. Also, if you do wind up playing this game, you're gonna have to talk in a higher pitched voice because the game was programmed with children in mind and doesn't respond well to deeper voices. There was also difficulty emulating this game because of the mic peripheral, but it was eventually figured out. Skull Kid. He's a rather interesting character featured in the Zelda series. First introduced in Ocarina of Time, but prominently featured in Majora's Mask as the supposed main antagonist. In his initial design, he either had pitch black skin or his face was obscured by the shadows of his hat. Either way, it received criticisms due to its resemblance to blackface, after which he was given a scarecrow-like look before Twilight Princess gave him another redesign. Modders. As it relates to the N64, modders are people who make or provide instructions to physically alter the N64 in some way, most prominently providing an HDMI output or removing the region lock to play imported games. Moopin 64. This is an N64 emulator that is somewhat less popular than Project 64. However, it is compatible with Linux, so Moopin is the emulator built into RetroArch, the popular front-end one-stop shop for many different consoles. L is Real 2401. This is what many people believe is carved into the star statue in Mario 64. Others think it's supposed to be Eternal Star, which would match the statue, or possibly just generic scribblings to provide detailing to the world. It should be noted that this texture also existed within Ocarina of Time. However, many people were dead set on the L is Real idea, and many theories were crafted around that. The popular belief back then was that the game was hinting you could unlock Luigi by collecting 2,401 coins. Of course, that's not true. Another popular idea was that this was a subtle promotion for Paper Mario, as Luigi was featured in that game, and the North American release date was February 5th, 2001, one day after 2401. This is honestly a bit of a stretch to me. Funnily enough, L is Real 2401 turned out to be true in another sense, as the Gigaleak, which showed Luigi's model in Mario 64, was publicly released 24 years and 1 month after Mario 64 came out. Pokemon Stadium, the only Pokemon game on the N64 that emulates how the original games played. Although this is purely a battle simulator, there was no adventure mode or catching and training Pokemon. In this, you just pick your Pokemon and their movesets. Basically, this is an old school Pokemon showdown. You were able to transfer your Pokemon team from the Game Boy games into this one, and if you happen to have Missing No, he would appear as a substitute doll. Pokemon Snap, a Pokemon game in which instead of battling or capturing, you take the role of a wildlife Pokemon photographer. Honestly, a great idea for a Pokemon spin-off game that earned its fan-favorite status. In keeping with the photography theme, Blockbuster featured print stations to actually print out photos from the game, as well as Pokemon Stadium. The game featured 63 Pokemon, which is strange given Nintendo's obsession with the number 64 at the time. A lot of people believe that there was a secret Pokemon hidden somewhere in the game. However, in promotional footage, Ekans can be seen, which was cut from the final game. So 64 Pokemon was intended, but for one reason or another, the game fell short by 1. Hey You Pikachu Hate. This is referencing the old myth that saying Sony, PlayStation, or Sega to Pikachu in the game would make him angry. However, data miners found the game's word list, and none of Nintendo's rivals showed up. Unagi Eel. This is that giant eel enemy from Mario 64, later renamed to Maw-Ray. It was the subject of a lot of kids' nightmares. This source of traumatization only appeared in Jolly Roger Bay. N64DD was originally planned to release in America in 2000, but got cancelled. The 64DD was an add-on to the N64 similar to the Sega CD, except the 64DD used proprietary discs. It launched in Japan in '99 with the intention of coming stateside, but its failure in Japan resulted in its cancellation. It was planned all the way back in '95, shortly after the PS1 was released. Part of the reason for the 64DD's existence was to compete with the PS1 and the Dreamcast, which both used CDs that were able to store considerably more data compared to a cartridge. Mario 64 Shindo Edition. This was an updated version of Mario 64 that released in Japan a year after the original. The most notable change that was advertised was the addition of Rumble Pack support. But beyond that, there were a couple of other changes. For one, it included all of the additions in the North American version that was lacking in the original Japanese release, which were mostly voice clips of a couple of things Mario says. It added a weird Easter egg on the title screen that duplicated Mario's face. It also changed the famous "So long, gay Bowser" into a more generic "bye-bye."
So long, gay Bowser. Bye-bye.
And to the chagrin of speedrunners everywhere, the backwards long jump was patched out. If these changes sound familiar to you, that's because this version was the one used in the recent Mario 3D All-Stars release. Mario 64 Beta. Now we go from a later edition of Mario 64 to a pre-release one. As with any game, there was a lot of pre-release content that didn't make it to the final release. There's a lot of little things, like the HUD being a little different, placeholder voice clips for Mario,
No! Yeah!
coins with a different design, stars being 2D sprites instead of a 3D model, even a mini-map for some reason. Some of the most interesting changes, in my opinion, are all of the alternative level designs. I'll link to the Cutting Room Floor wiki so you can check out what we have records of. Smash Render Origins. This is referring to the portraits on the character select screen. Instead of being made for Smash specifically, all of the portraits were actually sourced from pre-existing artwork of each character. Modified, of course, to all have a similar look. I'm not going to go into each one, but I'll link to a video that goes over them. Banjo-Tooie anti-piracy measures. This game probably had the most advanced anti-piracy measures of the entire N64 library. The game used two systems of anti-piracy. The first, which was easily bypassed, was on the title screen, where if it detected a pirated game, it would not register any controllers as being plugged in, thus soft-locking the game. The other anti-piracy system, which took nearly 10 years to crack, was a more technically complex system that I won't go into too much detail, but I'll try to simplify it as best I can. The game would send checks to a physical chip present in official games, which would then send a response back to the game, and that response acted as a key to decrypt game assets. Each check used different strings with different responses, so in order to bypass these checks, each one had to be specifically bypassed. If any of them failed, the game would simply crash. It had a total of 268 checks. Wario Apparition. A majority of you watching this Iceberg right now has probably seen the original Mario 64 Iceberg and knows all too well what the Wario Apparition is. For those who don't know, it's a creepypasta about Mario 64 really being haunted and a giant disembodied Wario head chases and kills Mario or something like that? Something about personalization? I don't remember. It's weird. Its origin was from an E3 presentation in '96 with Wario's head interrupting Mario 64 footage. Mario no Photopea. This is basically a sequel to Mario Paint that released exclusively in Japan, although it seems more limiting than Mario Paint with less features. The cartridge was unique in that it had two slots for memory cards that were the precursor to SD cards at the time. This design kind of reminds me of an EverDrive. A year later, the first entry in the Mario Artist series came out, which was closer to what you were able to do in Mario Paint. Happy Mask Salesman. Just like Skull Kid, the Happy Mask Salesman was a character introduced in Ocarina of Time, but had a more prominent role in Majora's Mask. Due to the fact that he seems to know more than he lets on, there's a lot of mysteries and theories surrounding this character. My personal favorite is that he's really Shigeru Miyamoto. I mean, sure, their grins are kind of similar. Another strange thing is that the Moon Children you encountered before the final Majora fight all seem to resemble the Happy Mask Salesman. Whether this was a deliberate choice or just reusing assets is hard to tell, however in the original release under their masks reveals no face textures. But in the 3D re-release they added the Happy Mask Salesman's face, which seems like a deliberate act. Although not canon in the manga adaptation of Majora's Mask, the Happy Mask Salesman is heavily implied to have sinister motives. Addams Family Pinball. In '92, there was apparently a very popular pinball machine, the most popular in fact, based off of the Addams Family movie that released in '91. In '98, the developer Digital Eclipse announced plans for an Addams Family pinball game for the Nintendo 64. According to the main programmer, The physics engine was made up for it, but other than that, the game was cancelled before any real amount of progress could be made, and there are no screenshots that exist for it. If I may go off on a bit of a tangent, while looking this entry up, I've never noticed this before, but there is not a single pinball game within the N64 library, not even as a side minigame that I could find. SpongeBob SquarePants Super Sponge. There were rumors of an N64 port for this game which did release on the PS1 and Game Boy Advance. There's nothing really supporting this rumor though. N64 Tom and Jerry fighting game. Its actual title is Tom and Jerry in Fists of Fury. It's a 3D fighting game similar to Power Stone, but with only one-on-one fights. It seems to have gotten decent reviews when released, although I can't comment if it holds up now, but I doubt it. It even got a sequel, Tom and Jerry in War of the Whiskers, released for the GameCube, PS2, and Xbox, but this was not as well received. Banjo-Tooie Pterodactyl Land Easter Egg. In the aforementioned game and level, there exists a vulgar Easter egg shown in the landscape. Yup. Scrapped multiplayer mode in Mario 64. It has been known long before the Giga Leak that a multiplayer mode was planned, which was where Luigi was going to be featured. But it got cut, which also led to Luigi being cut. Metal Mario texture. In older games that featured reflective surfaces, often a reference image is used as they did not have the means to reflect the surrounding areas in real time. In Mario 64, in the game's files, this image is used on Metal Mario's reflection, but for a while the origins of it eluded people. In June of 2020, Cumber posted on Twitter that he found the original reference image, which is flowers in a garden but flipped and resized. I also tried to look into the reflected image of Smash 64's Metal Mario, but I could not find any info online. It kinda looks like the single-player stage Race to the Finish, but I don't know. If you know, comment down below. Cancelled Grinch game. I'm not sure, but I think this is referencing a possible cancelled N64 port of the Grinch game that released for PS1 and Dreamcast in 2000. Raw 64 Life. This is the YouTube channel that posted the famous video of that kid being extremely happy about getting the N64 for Christmas. Nintendo 64 DD. See the previous entry about how the 64 DD was planned for the US but got cancelled. Fire Emblem 64. This was a planned but cancelled entry into the Fire Emblem series. Little was known about it until a book about the Fire Emblem development came out in 2015 titled The Making of Fire Emblem. The book confirmed one popular theory that the 64 version was developed into the Binding Blades for the Game Boy Advance. The story and characters were almost completely rewritten to where the only surviving character was Kar-El, with other characters and elements to be reused in various future games in the series. This all seems to parallel Earthbound 64, which also got turned into a GBA game. The only difference being the story and characters remained largely the same, but we will get into that in a little bit. Animal Forest, or Dubatsu no Mori. This game was the first entry of the Animal Crossing series that was released exclusively for Japan on the Nintendo 64 in 2001. The 2002 GameCube release of Animal Crossing is an enhanced version of this one. Mario Artist series. As mentioned before, these were 4 games released exclusively in Japan for the 64 DD. Each game in the series added more features and could be used with one another. I'll link to a video explaining this series in a lot more detail. Dragon King, the fighting game. This game was the fighting game that would eventually turn into Smash Bros. There exists no video of this game prior to its transformation, only a couple images. Apparently some of Captain Falcon's moves and animations were recycled from work done on this game. Banjo-Kazooie in Diddy Kong Racing. This entry is actually incorrect. It was Banjo without Kazooie, but also Conker as well. With this being a rare game, it made sense for them to use characters they had future plans for, as this was both Banjo and Conker's first appearance. iQ Player. This was essentially a plug-and-play console built into a single controller made specifically for the Chinese market. It was designed in such a way to abuse some legal loopholes of the Chinese ban of video game consoles at the time, and to fight pirates, as the game did not use cartridges. Instead, games came preloaded with them typically, but there were services to download games onto memory cards. The main service for this was called iQ at Home, which was an online service to download games. This was discontinued in 2018, which is crazy to think about. The iQ has also been sought after by people who prefer to play on original hardware, as it's designed like a normal controller instead of that weird three-pronged thing that Nintendo put out. It also ran games slightly faster, so it was favored among speedrunners as well. Also, as a side note, if you recall the Nintendo Giga Leak, apparently a lot of those files came from iQ servers. Donkey Kong 64 anti-piracy measures. These measures seem less notable than banjo-kazooie. Basically, if the game detects it's pirated, it will randomly delete saved game files. Get in or get out. This is referring to an American marketing campaign for the N64, with commercials typically ending with this famous quote: "Unused levels in Super Mario 64. In the game's debug level select, there are 7 levels that have no assets to them and can't be accessed in the original game. These levels were all revealed in the aforementioned Giga Leak, which confirmed most of these levels were either for testing, extremely early drafts of other levels, or designs scrapped very early in development. Some of these levels were previously spotted in beta build footage." Hyundai Comboy 64. This is an extremely rare variant of the N64 that was released in South Korea. Due to an import ban on Japanese products at the time, Nintendo found a way around it by getting a Korean car manufacturer, Hyundai, to distribute the console for them under a new name. Very similar to the Chinese and iQ situation. This was intended to be the standard South Korean N64 model, but funnily enough, the import ban was lifted very early in production, allowing the unmodified N64 to be released as is. Hiroshi Yamanouchi's affiliation with Nintendo. He was the extremely long-term president of Nintendo from 1949 to 2002. It was his leadership that transformed Nintendo from a little playing card company into the video game powerhouse that it is today. He was more of a businessman, known to not really be interested in playing video games. Near the end of his tenure, he had made some questionable decisions which involved his particular dislike of RPGs, resulting in the N64 having very few and losing the Final Fantasy series to Sony. Being succeeded by Iwata, a much more charismatic and beloved figure, Hiroshi will probably not be as fondly remembered despite his significance. Mario Artist Series. This is an accidental duplicate entry from the Iceberg creator. RandNet. This was an online service for the 64DD that was similar to the Super Famicom Satellaview, if you know what that is. It had some basic stuff, like being able to email and a newsfeed. But it had some interesting things too, like an early forum system to talk about games you are currently playing, being able to beta test pre-released games, and plans for online play, but the latter never came to fruition as the only games compatible ended up being the Mario Artist series and a golf game, with the service only being active for little over a year. Cancelled Mario Paint sequel. There seems to be some confusion over this being a separate game to Mario no Photopea. The Mario Wiki has a separate entry for Mario Paint 64 and Photopea. It only links to an interview Miyamoto did where he dropped the Mario Paint 64 name. Other than that, I'm certain Photopea was the intended Mario Paint sequel. Mother 3. This entry is actually referring to the cancelled Earthbound 64. Mother 3 was the name given to the game when development was moved to the Game Boy Advanced. This game is probably one of the most sought-after cancelled games that I can think of. I remember when the Nintendo Giga Leak happened, I was really hoping we would finally get whatever existed of Earthbound 64, but to no avail. We did get an internal Nintendo presentation of Earthbound 64 that only released a few months ago with brand new footage. A lot of info that's out there has been heavily dissected. We do know the overall story and characters are largely the same when moved to the GBA, but how the story plays out, as well as some of the characters, may have been different. There is a 2-part Earthbound 64 Iceberg video that is criminally underviewed. Please give that a watch, as it contains every possible morsel of information we have for Earthbound 64. You know, it would be great if Nintendo released Earthbound 64 as part of the Switch's N64 bundle. That will justify its high price, similar to what they did with Star Fox 2 on the SNES Mini. Speaking of Star Fox, I do want to mention Dinosaur Planet, which is not on this iceberg, but is almost as notable as Earthbound 64. Dinosaur Planet was a new IP with development for it getting delayed to the point of being pushed to the GameCube, and at some point they decided to make it a Star Fox game. Unlike Earthbound 64, Dinosaur Planet actually did get leaked and is now playable. I honestly don't know how complete the version that leaked is, or if the story plays out to completion, but it's amazing it was found. Some more info on that is on yet another criminally underviewed Iceberg video about the general series of Star Fox. That one is funny because Dinosaur Planet leaked in the middle of him making his video. Go give that one a watch. Another great Iceberg video. Minus the entries about furry porn, I could have lived a happy life never having known the name Togepi1125. I'm warning you now, do not look it up, just watch the Iceberg. Catastrophe Crow. You may have noticed there are a lot of entries in the lower 2 levels I have not brought up yet. This is because they are all related to the lore of Catastrophe Crow. I didn't want the latter part of this video to be consumed by this one topic, although it is very interesting and I highly recommend looking into it further. To give a very basic summary, the whole thing started with a video from Adam Butcher. He gave background info on a cancelled game called Catastrophe Crow, which transitioned into him showing that he bought a beta cart. Then he showed some gameplay. Initially, it looked like another cutesy platformer similar to Banjo, but things started to take an odd turn. Adam fell completely silent as the game devolved into a glitchy creepypasta nightmare. After this video, it became apparent that Catastrophe Crow was not in fact a real game, but the subject of an ARG, or alternate reality game. There's a lot to this, hence why there are so many entries on the Iceberg about it. I will link to the game theory video explaining much of the early findings, but more has since been uncovered. N64 specs. There are a few entries that refer to the N64 specs. I'll just go over them real quick. It weighs 2.42 pounds, supports over 16 million colors. The processor is the NEC VR4300 with a clock speed of 93.75 MHz. Standard resolution is 320 by 240, but with the RAM expansion, a few games were able to be shown in 640 by 480. December 10th, 1997. This is the date the N64 launched in Brazil, nearly 6 months after the original Japanese release. Somewhat late, but not the latest country to get the N64. India didn't get it until December of 2000, and China got the IQ system in November of 2003. Project Reality. This was the codename for the Ultra 64, which was the original name for the Nintendo 64. Luigi's Mansion was originally planned to release on the Nintendo 64. This isn't entirely accurate, but there is some truth to it. In an archived interview with the development team, very early concepts and ideas were passed around for a game to take place in a singular building. These ideas were intended for the Nintendo 64 and to be a new IP without any Nintendo characters, much like Smash Bros. Even the concept of a haunted mansion was not a part of the early ideas. Once it was decided to move to the GameCube, Luigi was who the team decided to star in the game, and then the concept of a haunted mansion came after that. The game then started to take shape. Pitfall 64. I can find very little info online, but there's apparently a cancelled Pitfall game intended for the N64. I'm certain this is just another version of Pitfall 3D Beyond the Jungle, which did release for the PS1. Activision is who developed that game, and Activision is also listed on the cancelled Pitfall 64, so I think that's all there is to this. Every copy of Mario 64 is personalized. This was the last entry in the famous Mario 64 Iceberg. This is somewhat related to the Wario apparition, and is mostly just a theory / creepypasta entry typically found in a lot of Iceberg images. And that's the Iceberg. If you made it this far, then I know you got some enjoyment out of this, and I appreciate you watching to this point. I'd be open to a part 2 if there's enough material to work with. Please comment below if you can think of any good entries for a potential part 2, as well as any corrections for this video if there is any. Again, I would appreciate a like on this video, a sub to my channel, and a follow on my Twitch. I also started a podcast recently. It is recorded live on Twitch every other Sunday. It can be found on my VOD channel and on my Patreon for free. The topics are announced on my Discord. It's mostly about video games, but not necessarily, and we accept live call-ins. I will catch you all next time.